Hi there, I'm Evrim and this is my React project. Tower of Fantasy is an online game that is currently available only in China. I made an online resource to help English speakers play the Chinese version, and it can also be used for the upcoming global version. Each page documents major facets of the game. The Simulacra page contains a list of all the characters. Clicking through that list brings up a modal with relevant information for that character. It's not quite a modal yet, but the behavior will be implemented. The live site right now uses Bootstrap's modal, but there is an issue. I wasn't able to layer modal backdrop to match the design I wanted. Since the image covers modal backdrop, I can't close the modal by clicking on the right margin. It'll click on the image instead. And I also needed the backdrop behind the image so that the original contents don't show underneath. Looking back, one solution would be to add a second layer that would close the modal when clicked, on top of the image. However, I decided to drop Bootstrap from my project, as I was mainly only using the grid. Tailwind would be more appropriate in that case, but I enjoy CSS and will implement the behavior manually to fine-tune the effects. Another challenge was the page layout. Take a look at the live site. The middle column is centered in the entire viewport throughout all screen sizes. As a consequence, the side navigation collapses too early so that it doesn't cover the main content. Instead, we could have just pushed the middle column to the right. To solve this, I made a prototype using the CSS clamp function. I wanted to do this fully with clamp to avoid media queries, but still had to use them for specific breakpoints. Notice how the middle column is not centered in the viewport, but rather in the available space. It later becomes centered in the viewport when there's enough width for it to do so. Implemented on the site, it looks like this. If we compare this with the old version, we can keep the side navigation open for much longer before collapsing it. Okay, so back to our character page. Let's take a look at the data flow. All of our data is in the data folder. Our main component wraps the navigation and all our routes or pages. For example, the URL ending in Simulacra will display the Simulacra page. The Simulacra page displays these modal menus, which accept props of type and list content. In modal menu, we map the list content to a new list. The new list has parts that are conditionally rendered based on the type. That's how we get this menu. The reason we have conditional rendering is because some of these lists might have different things, such as the Simulacra page has these two images at the bottom, while the other ones do not. Now let's render the modal based on which menu item was clicked. This approach is based on matching the URL ending to the character's name. Back in main component, we have a route extending Simulacra. This :item name can be any text. This just says, let's store that text in a parameter called item name. This route renders the modal component, which accepts a type. The modal component uses the type to decide which data set that we need to use. So for Simulacra, we're going to be using the characters data set. Then we're going to be using the parameter item name, which is the text after Simulacra in the URL. I have a helper function here that's going to take the URL ending and match it to the object name inside of the data set. The modal component once again uses the type to conditionally render the correct modal layout. Our type is Simulacra, so we're going to render the Simulacra modal. And that's how we get from each page displaying a menu to the modal contents based on which menu item was clicked. I hope this was interesting and I hope you enjoyed my project.